André Lessears Sr. is the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for UAB Health System, where he leads a strategy that fosters inclusive leadership to create a health system where patients and caregivers have a sense of belonging, dignity, and respect. Prior to joining UAB, André served as the Director for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion for the Cleveland Clinic Akron General. With his leadership, Cleveland Clinic Akron General was designated as an autism-friendly hospital by the Autism Society. And in his career, André has helped design a number of practices and programs that have been recognized by the National League of Cities, Diversity Inc., the Association of ERGs and Councils, and Black Pages Magazine. And most importantly, he was recently named one of the top 100 chief diversity officers by the National Diversity Council. So without further ado, André, I would love to pass the mic over to you to start your keynote today. The title is Building Bridges for a Sustainable Organizational DE&I Strategy and Plan. Welcome, André.
Thank you, and welcome. And thank you all for joining us today. I'm really excited to share this time with you all. We don't have much time, so we're just going to jump right into our presentation today and just get started. One of the things that's really critically important that you're going to hear me say a lot today is how do we level set this conversation to where it's no longer a value proposition, meaning we're not just having the conversation based on a heartstring conversation, meaning whether or not this is the quote unquote right thing to do. My experience has really led me to understand that that is part of the conversation, but it shouldn't be what you lead with the conversation. We really need to figure out how we can tie this to the organizational goals, values, and decision-making points and processes so that it's really integrated into just how you not only do business, but how a business identifies itself. And so there's some very critical steps that we need to take in order to do that. And that's really what this session is going to be, is what are some of the things that I have found useful to really help start the conversation, to shift it to a strategic discussion rather than a value proposition conversation. And so like most things, I like to start things with a video. I'm just going to share this here with you, and then it's just a good thing to kind of level set us.
Whoa, that's not good.
Oh, I don't need this. I'm already late.
Somebody will come. Anybody out there?
Do you have a phone?
No. Sorry. Somebody! Hello? There are two people stuck on an escalator and we need help. Now, would somebody please do something? Help! I don't believe this. You gotta be kidding me.
I'm gonna cry.
Well, it's not enough left to do, is it?
Hello? Hey, don't worry about it. I'll fix it in a second.
He said he can fix it. All right. All right. That's more like it. He says he can fix it.
So I like starting the conversations off with that because I think that's a really great analogy of how often the conversation starts with, diversity, equity, and inclusion, strategic planning, or conversations around how we're going to do this work. It really often feels like we're stuck. We're going along, we're having some success, we're reaching certain plateaus, and then all of a sudden things just seem to hit a brick wall. And then we find ourselves stuck wondering, what's next? What do we do? How do we have this conversation? How do we make sure we're bringing other folks to the conversation? And a lot of times those conversations seem to really be very cyclical, and we don't really understand how and why we can, what we should do next. And we do what most organizations do. We hire a consultant or we bring a third party in to kind of help coach us through. And when in reality of it is that there are oftentimes a lot of institutional structures, a lot of institutional talent, a lot of institutional people and resources and expertise to take that next step where we just need to walk up the escalator instead of just going along with the flow. And so there are certain truths that I think are really critical for us to understand. One, a lot of times the talent that we have and need is already within us, meaning within the organization. We just need to organize it and empower it to have the conversation. The other truths I think is really critical, and I usually end my presentations with a slide, but I think it's critically important. I'm going to start really having this as the beginning. There are certain truths to this conversation that we need to face. One, diversity is a fact. It is not something that's negotiable. In the world of the technology that we have, the access that we have, our global society has shrunk, and we have much more accessibility, and we're identifying and bringing in people from all walks of life every day. I define diversity and I socialize the definition of diversity within our organization as any difference that makes a difference. End of sentence. We can't get into the conversation on whether or not what's the right type of diversity. Diversity is real. It is a fact. It is non-negotiable. The next piece is, and this is where the choice starts, how are we going to leverage the diversity that's in our organization? How equitable are we going to choose to be? How equitable is our organization capable of being? What processes are in place that impede us from being able to reach the level of equity that we believe we want to have? Equity is a choice. Inclusion is the action. Those are the behaviors that we're trying to institutionalize or socialize so that we can take advantage of the things that we hold dear, which is our people, talent, and resources. And the next thing is that we want to create an environment or a culture where belonging is the outcome, where everyone comes in and believes and understands that they can meet their full potential as a member of our organizations, or in my case, our patients understand that they're going to get the best, not only the world-class care, but culturally competent, care that is culturally based in cultural humility. The other piece that I think is really critical when you're starting your conversation is understanding this basic truth. Responsibility does not mean it's your fault. Too often this conversation starts with, particularly for those folks who don't feel like they are a part of the conversation, whoever you're defining as the majority, they'll say things like, well, it wasn't my fault. I didn't create the system. I didn't create the policy. My ancestors weren't here when X thing happened, or this, it's always a conversation of whose fault it is. That is irrelevant. The truth is, and the reality is that we are all stewards of the institutions and the resources that we are currently leading. And we have a responsibility as stewards today to remedy any shortcomings that are in place. And just because it's your responsibility does not mean it's your fault. This is where I start having what I call the grown-up conversation with our leaderships, where we need to really have this conversation where we understand the very fundamental belief of what we're trying to understand. Because in any aspect of life, it seems, diversity and inclusion is a good thing. If you talk to any financial manager worth their salt, they'll tell you to diversify your portfolio. If you talk to an ecologist, they'll tell you you need to diversify the environment in order to have a healthy environment. It only seems that somehow or another we've fallen for this great lie that when it comes to people, that diversity and inclusion doesn't work. When we know through every most knowledgeable research institutions on any aspect of the impact diversity and inclusion has on our systems, they all show that they yield better results. This is what we need to lead with our organization, the data that shows the benefit of this, not the conversation around doing this because it's the right thing to do. We change hearts by showing results. And I often lead with folks telling them that it's not my responsibility to challenge your values and your beliefs. It's my responsibility to give you the skills necessary to have the behavior that is expected to get the results that you want. And so here's where that conversation really starts to be. So you set the parameters before you start building of what the conversation is and what it is not. Then you really start laying that foundation. The first bridge you need to build is making sure that there's alignment. Our CEO here at UAB has a great analogy that he uses for the bridges as far as how we are going to have success. And the first bridge is alignment. We need to make sure that all our systems and all our policies and all our processes are pulling us in the direction toward the success that we want. And if they're not, remedying that in real time. The next piece is making sure that you have an organizational structure that enhances and encourages the leveraging and the ability to benefit from your diverse talent and expertise that are within your organization so you can have equity and inclusion. The next thing is you have to make sure you have quality initiatives. I've been socializing, and people who know me and work with me very closely, I tell people all the time, one of the first questions I ask is, are we in a rush to go nowhere? Meaning, are we doing initiatives just for the sake of saying we're doing an initiative? Or are we focusing on the quality initiative that's actually going to lead to quality, sustainable results? That we're going to have quality and sustainable change. And if that means slowing down and pausing to make sure that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's and making sure that we're not doing things that further exasperates the marginalized experiences of the people that we're trying to enhance, then we need to do that. The next thing is we have to stay focused on our operations margins for improvement, which basically means we have to be good stewards of the resources that we have. We are not in a situation where we have an abundance or a infinite amount of resources that we have available to us. And so in addition to making the business case for it, we have to look at how are we making sure that we are proving out that bottom line impact of inclusion and equity in the service areas that we're providing. And the next piece is the outreach. Not only outreach to our customers, but outreach to our employees, our caregivers, in the work that we're doing. We can't keep these things close to our vest. It can't be just something that settles into the leadership space. This is something that has to be bottom down led, or top down led, but bottom up infused and work through. It's a both and conversation. The next piece is identifying where your organization is. As I mentioned earlier before, you have to have a conversation of what is your organization's capacity? What's your organization capability? And this conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion. What's the current behaviors and practices that are in place, and how do they lend to your goals of being more inclusive and more equitable in the services that you're delivering? If you don't take the time to find out where you are, then you're constantly going to be there and you're not going to know either where you're going or where you want to be. And you're constantly going to be looking back where you were. Having that picture and that clarity of here's where we are, and here's where we don't want to be, and here's where we want to be. I use this organizational development model. It's called the MCOD, or the Multicultural Organization Development Model, to really simplify the conversation as to what are the explicit behaviors that we can identify that tell us where we are as an organization. How can we make sure that we're using not anecdotal data, but real assessment data to really help have this conversation? It doesn't have to be something that's over involved or where you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to do it. There are certain assessment tools that you can do that are really easily and that you can react to in real time to really level set the organization. Because like most organizations, I'm making an educated guess that you're constantly gathering feedback, you're constantly evaluating processes, and throughout those processes, this is a tool that I use that I can overlay to the things that are currently in place that we're measuring and the feedback that we're getting to see how they're playing out as far as how we say we are an inclusive or a multicultural organization. And as you can see, this is a 6 orientations, is divided into 3 sessions: the monocultural or the exclusive, the non-discriminatory. This is really the group that focuses more so on compliance. You start seeing some tentative initiatives to move a little further, but nothing really committal. And then you have the multicultural organizations, which are really looking to leverage that equity and inclusion into their day-to-day practices. So I mentioned the skills areas before. At my core, I'm an educator. And so once I frame the conversation of what the conversation is and what it's not, once we identify how we need to align and organize and identify where we are as an organization, the next piece is how are we going to get there? And this is where that skill development comes. This is usually where the conversation starts with what training and supports do we need to give our employees in order to get to where we need to be. And so I believe there are 5 core competencies or skills that are needed in order to truly move an organization to become more inclusive. Those are self-awareness. You're constantly finding out who you are, what your blind spots are, what your biases are, what they mean, and more importantly, how do they show up when you're in those decision-making points. The next piece is developing a sense of empathy. And I believe empathy is not putting yourself in someone else's shoes. I think that leads with some presumption, leads with you leading with your assumed understanding of how someone else's lived experiences impacts them. I am socializing, and I socialize empathy as an understanding and a willingness and ability to accept the person or customer or employee as they are when they show up in front of you and being fully present there. The next piece is really developing some flexibility and a tolerance for ambiguity. This is one of the few areas where, to put it very honestly, the goal line's always moving. This is a journey, not a destination. And so you have to have that tolerance for ambiguity, that you're constantly going to ask questions. The moment you figured it out one place, you're going to have additional questions, and you're constantly needs to be able to be fluid and flexible so that you can respond in real time. The next piece is having a sense of curiosity. You have to understand that there are aspects of things that you don't know, and that is part of the journey of really expanding that knowledge base so that you can really be responsive. And the next piece is really patience. Again, this is a destination. This is a journey, not a destination, or a marathon, not a sprint. However you want to phrase that. This is something that is, the focus is on sustainability. In addition to success, it's sustained success. What are the habits and behaviors you need to integrate so that you're having long-term success? Regardless of who's in the seat of leadership, this is ingrained into how you're making decisions. And for me, it really boils down to the W.I.L.F.M, the what's in it for me stamp conversation. And part of that really is, these are four areas where any organization understands the value of it. One, can your employees feel, or do they feel, they can meet their full potential when they are if they are a part of your organization? When they show up, they know that they will be valued and respected and encouraged to meet their full potential, so that they can be productive. The next piece is safety. Do your employees and your customers, in my case, patients, feel safe when they are in your space? Mentally, physically, emotionally, intellectually safe in that space. Are you cognizant of the cost, both the cost benefit? If you are good and you're successful with this diversity, equity, inclusion conversation, you can expand your market share. That's not and should not be a dirty word or dirty concept for this conversation. It's part of why we do business. And if we don't do it well, it will cost us, and our market share will shrink. People have choice, and they will choose another organization that, quite frankly, where they will feel safe and included if they don't feel that way with you. And the next piece is, ultimately at the very floor, is how do you make sure that you're not leaving yourself open to any liability by not doing it right? And this is one of the last things that I like to share is, we've all heard this saying, every system is exquisitely designed to produce the results that it gets. When I hear that saying, I think of some of these two spiders, who I see as very talented, capable, high achievers, who have been asked to take the lead on an initiative or a program without much direction. And so what they do what most of us do. We do what we do well, and we hope for the best. And we have a lot of confidence in what it is that we're doing because we've done it hundreds of thousands, if not millions of times. But we don't take time to look at the system or the structure in which we are applying a talent or an approach that we use universally. And so, like these spiders, high achievers, well-meaning, they were selected to lead because of those abilities. They've executed based on the skills that they have the most competency around, but yet they're still not going to get the results that they want because they applied it to the wrong structure and system without taking time to lay the foundation, to ask those intentional questions of, are these the right people to be leading this? Is this the right skill that I need to apply to this exercise? And if we don't take those times to do those things that I laid out prior, the aligning, the organizing, looking at systems and structures, frame the conversation to what it is and what it's not, tying it and integrating it to your core values as an organization and to your decision-making points, we're going to have similar results to this spider, which is we're not going to get the results that we want. And so for me, again, these are some of the things that I'm socializing in our system here at UAB. Our engagement is a top priority for us. So simply put, diversity makes us smarter. Inclusion makes us better. We know that being around people who are different than us will enhance our ability to identify and that will lead to innovation. From a financial standpoint, again, we want to promote the participation of diverse businesses, because not only will it impact those businesses positively, it will impact us as an organization and impact our bottom line better. We understand that quality is key. When you're delivering services, particularly in healthcare, quality and safety are paramount. And so the only way that we can truly do that well, consistently, is understanding a way to leverage diversity and cultural competency in our workforce to make sure that we're meeting our caregivers and our patients in a culturally humble way to do the work that we're doing. And then we have to work to advance knowledge. We have to understand that these are culturally competency in healthcare systems improve healthcare outcomes. Representation in healthcare improves health outcomes. We have to understand and advance the knowledge of the positive impact, measurable positive impact on why this matters for us. And with that said, we also have to understand that with any change comes the perception of a threat. And so I use the SCARF model for our leaders to really help us understand that when people are pushing back on the change that we're instituting, it's not because they're bad people most of the time. There are some people who will push back because they're not, they may not be good people. But before we make that lead with that assumption, let's take a time to coach those folks up and see, as leaders, what are the things that they perceive to be threatened by the change that we're proposing? Because all change is perceived as a threat. Is it their status? Meaning, is the change we're instituting going to impact them? Do they perceive it to negatively impact the status that they have, that where their identity is tied into? Is there some uncertainty that they may have, and how can we clarify that? Do they feel their autonomy is threatened? And how can we make sure that they understand what choices they have and where they do have control? Do they feel like their relatedness, or that this is an organization that's moving away to where they too belong? And the next piece, which we all tend to grasp to, is the fairness. Is the change that's happening perceived to be unfair for them? Will they be treated fairly, etc.? All these things are perceptions of threats that can, when executed appropriately, we can coach our teams through these perceptions of threat to really get them to where we can help them understand that where the threat is real versus where it's not, and then have a very real conversation around the skills that we're going to and supports we're going to put in place if the threat perception is real. And so that's all I have for you. Do you have any questions or comments, Charlene, or anything? I'm sure that the chat box is blowing up over on your end.
I do have a question that had come in after you had addressed empathy as a core skill. Mm-hmm. And that question is from Matthew, and he's asking, obviously empathy is a great skill. Can you provide an example or two of how you would train others in that skill?
Yeah, so for us on a healthcare standpoint, it's really about, meeting patients where they are and understanding their vulnerability. And so when you're having a conversation with a patient who is frustrated or tired or scared about the care that they're going in, and they have a complaint because they feel like the care has fallen short, the worst thing that we can do is go in and say, hey, I'm going to fix it. And here's the policy that we're going to rely on to do it. And here's your remedies. You could talk to the ombuds person, you could talk to the patient advocacy person, et cetera. The first thing is being very intentional in naming where the upset and anxiety is tied to. I understand that you're afraid. I understand that you did not get the care that you want. And let's unpack that a bit before you just go to what most of us do, is that list of things that we have on our mental Rolodex that we rely on right away, just to kind of go through that motion, but actually pausing and hearing that person where they feel heard and they feel safe in that space, and holding that space for that person before you go to, here's how we're going to fix it. Because a lot of times, particularly in healthcare, patients want to feel like they are heard before they, whatever fix you're going to offer them.
Well stated. Empathy has come up a lot throughout today in a lot of different ways. And as much as we've asked it, we've continued to get some really wonderful, insightful answers. And no one has answered it the same, throughout the day. So that's been helpful to further that discussion. So another note here that I have jotted down is circling back to some of the leadership buy-in and whatnot. And that is, what advice do you have for the people in the audience on how to get leadership buy-in?
Yeah, so one of the things that I use, in my experience, leaders need tangible, very explicit plans. And so for me, what I use is the Deloitte University model for inclusive leadership, to really outline what explicit behaviors our leaders need to exhibit, and how we can, as an institution, just as much as we support our employees, we need to support our leaders. And as Chief Diversity Officer, that's kind of like I'm the first line of defense for them, is to coach up our leaders. So for me, coaching up our leaders to help them identify the tangible skills that they can, and measurable skills that they can develop and enhance, because they may have some of those traits, but not others. And using a model like the Deloitte inclusive leadership model to help coach them through has been really, really, it's been great for me, because it gives them measurable outcomes, and it gives them something that they can touch and we can measure and that they can see, without them feeling like they have to, quote unquote, be woke to understand what it means to be inclusive. And so I don't need them woke. I need them to understand the skills and the message. And what that does is it allows the leaders to understand that sometimes saying, I don't know, but I want to learn, is just as powerful as any well-rehearsed, non-committal statement that sounds good.
Very well said, Andre. I have another question here, and that is, should we start with conversations on race?
It depends on where your organization is. My default answer to that question is no, but that's because most organizations, quite frankly, are not ready to have that conversation yet. That is a very high risk, high support conversation. And so if you feel the need to start with race, then you're going to have to make sure that you have the institutional supports and structures in place, and very clear expectations on what that is, before you do that. Because if you don't have the supports, and you don't have the commitment of leadership, true commitment of leadership, to help them understand what the risk is with starting with race, then you're sinking your ship before it sails. And so I would encourage you to have those conversations about, what are the things that I want to accomplish and commit. And I'll just give you a really quick example. Most organizations had listening sessions after George Floyd, Breonna Taylor last summer. I'll just put it that way, right? However, most organizations didn't lead with, here's what we're going to do in real time, short term, and long term with the information that we're going to get. And here's our commitment to that. As a result, a lot of those listening sessions were done, and the information is just sitting somewhere on someone's desktop or someone's shelf or in someone's inbox. And there's really nothing to do with that. And so what we did when I was with the Cleveland Clinic was, we first had a conversation with our leadership at the very top. Here's some things that we're going to probably hear. We need some commitments that we can articulate to people. on what you're going to do. So we had commitments that we led with. If we hear something in real time, we are going to address it. And here's the leader who's going to address it in real time. Here's what we're going to do, and here's what we can't do. And here's how we're going to address it short-term, long-term, et cetera. And by leading with that, we built a safe space for folks to actually share. And we also built a space to where people felt like it was an authentic effort to create sustainable change.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What a wonderful example. And we touched on that earlier today with our listening panel discussion. And you totally reiterated that, André, in terms of having that safe space and allowing people to be authentic. And I think that's really great advice as well in terms of such a difficult question. And I will say, we are at time. Looking at the time, that went fast, right?
Yeah.
So as if additional questions come in, we'll go ahead and send them over to you. Oh, one quick question.
Okay.
Someone is asking if you could just reiterate that inclusive leadership model that you use. Is that the Deloitte reference, or was that?
Yeah, that's from Deloitte, and it's a phenomenal tool that really allows you to identify those tangible things. Again, if you haven't picked up anything from me, it's taking it from that idealistic, theoretical theory space to the practical, on the ground, tangible sense of here's what we can do, rather than what we can't do or what we shouldn't do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
It's
perfect.
very proactive, very, affirming of this is things that we can do. So let's start there before we start looking at all the things we can't do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And much more encouraging rather than the opposite viewpoint.
Yeah.